Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Comic Source. I'm your host, Jace, joined by my compatriot from Comic Boom, Rocky. Rocky, thanks for joining me.
Absolutely, man. Good to be here. Good to be here.
Yeah, so we're doing things a little different. Rocky and I normally are here for the DC spotlights, running down all the DC books, and it comes out on his Comic Boom YouTube channel. This one we're going to drop on the Comic Source YouTube channel. I'll also release the audio only on the podcast feed in case anybody wants to listen along, although we are going to be showing panels and parts of the story from We Have Demons. So this is Scott Snyder's first release through Comixology. For those not familiar with the deal, Scott Snyder's Best Jacket Press, which he started last year for kind of an umbrella imprint for all his creator-owned stuff. He signed a deal with Comixology to release. I think it's six. Um, I think it's six titles through Comixology that he's going to release. Four of them are coming out in October in what they're calling Scottober. So every Tuesday in October, there's going to be a different Comixology Scott Snyder written story coming out with various artists. So the first one came out this last Tuesday, October 5th. We Have Demons, it's called. Art is by and co-created by Greg Capullo. Next week, Clear number one, co-created by Francis Manipul, who also does the art. That's coming out on the 12th. And then the following, a long rumored story that Scott's been talking about working on for a long time with Francesco Francavilla called Night of the Ghoul. So that one comes out on the 19th. And then I think there's one more coming out, but I'm not actually. There's only three, so three of the first six, and then there's other ones that are coming out later on, and I'll look for those and find them for you in a few minutes here. But this is a really interesting way for Scott Snyder to kind of reach a new audience. And for those not familiar, Comixology is a digital platform, so they do have a deal to release their comics as print comics. That happens through Dark Horse. So these comics will eventually see the light of day, but for now, they're just digital. And what's really great about it, I read it for free. It didn't cost me anything because I have Amazon Prime. So if you have Amazon Prime, you can go read these Comixology comics for free. There's a couple of other ways you can get it. You can go sign up for Comixology Unlimited. It's very similar to Marvel Unlimited or the DC Universe app, where you pay a monthly subscription fee and you have access to all the comics that are
Yeah.
on Comixology Unlimited. If
Or
you
you
don't
can
want to pay
you can
them,
simply buy it. I just bought it.
yeah, exactly. Or you can just go to Amazon or go to Comixology and just pay for the comic. So and I there's no page number, so I'm not exactly sure how long it is, but it felt like a good chunk of story. So Rocky and I were going to talk about our initial impressions, and then we'll probably get into some nuts and bolts of the actual story, some things that we really liked. But this was my book of the week, and I do find it interesting. It's coming out on Tuesday, which is the same day that the DC books drop, as opposed to Wednesday, which is normally when new comics drop. I'm not familiar enough with Comixology original releases that I don't know. Do they release them all through the week? Do they always release them on Tuesdays? Like, I don't know. I've read stuff on Comixology before, and I know they've done some original stuff. And there's things that have interested me that I've wanted to read, and I've just never taken the plunge, like Afterlife,
Yeah.
or what's is that what it's called, from Chip Zdarsky?
Uh,
After Lift, After Lift, where it's basically cab driver
that's
for the like ferrying people to the afterlife. I think.
yeah, I think
Um,
so. Yeah, after lift. Yes.
yeah, yeah. So there's been other things, but this is Scott Snyder, and
Yeah.
I've never really considered myself the biggest Scott Snyder fan in terms of his work. I love the guy personally, and he loves comics, and he's a super nice guy, and he's very humble
Yeah.
and very talented. But the things he's written just they haven't always spoken to me. I'm not the biggest Batman guy, and that's kind of where he cut his teeth and whatnot. Um, but I tell you what, like over the last year, reading his Noctera, I've been blown away, and it just seems so clear to me that this is where his passion lies, like with the creator-owned stuff, where he has more freedom. Not to say he can't write good stories in the under the umbrella of DC Comics or whatever continuity. He can because he's skilled and he's talented. Um, but it just seems like when I read Noctera or when I read this We Have Demons, the writing thing that I was filled with was a sense of joy that both he and Greg Capullo are investing in this work that comes across through the page. At least I felt it like, man, these guys are having a blast creating this comic and telling the story. There's joy
Well,
in the creation of it,
yeah.
and there's passion, and they have complete creative freedom to do anything they want, and it's making for a really, really great comic. So that was my first impression. Was, man, these guys are having a lot of fun. This is a fantastic comic, big chunk of story. Um, like I said, it was free for me, but did you find the value? How much was it to purchase the single issue, Rocky?
It was actually 4.99, 4.99. So it was. I thought it was. It's expensive, but I mean, it's not bad. I don't think it's cheap. I mean, 4.99 American for me, but I was willing to give it a shot. It got you highly recommended it, and I trust your. I trust your judgment enough, and I'm glad I did. This is Snyder's element. Horror stories are his element. I know going in it's horror, so that's fine. When I've criticized Snyder in the past, I've often made criticism that his stories are often dark and a little bit too dark and depressing. But having said that, when I know it's horror going in, that's my expectation. And frankly, when I want a good horror, I got no problem reading Scott Snyder because he's very good at that. He's right in his element here. And like you said, it does show it is a good story. And we'll get into the weeds and we'll obviously talk about it. And I'll certainly elaborate as to why I really enjoy this. My favorite of his is on the horror side is American Vampire. I'm less a fan of his darkness in the DC universe, but I gotta say American Vampire I enjoyed, and this opening issue has really whet my appetite, so I'm quite happy with that. I also want to give a shout out to Comixology Originals. They're really advertising this. This is right on the front page of Comixology. You know, with the Substack controversy and everything else, this is definitely the way to go for Scott Snyder because he's getting a lot of free press with Comixology marketing this right on the front page. When I went there, boom, it's right up there in lights. We have demons. I think there's going to be, I have a sneaking suspicion this is going to get a lot of good press because this is a good story and there's going to be a lot of, I think there's going to be a lot of creators following suit because I think this is a better platform than Substack, but that's maybe a topic for another day.
No, let's talk a little bit about that because I talked to Scott about that very thing
Yeah.
way back in August.
Yeah.
And we talked about that and how you reach new people and how digital we both feel like is the new spinner rack, the modern version of the spinner rack. Because when you think about it, when you and I were collecting, you walked into the convenience store, the 7-Eleven, or the liquor store, or grocery store, or whatever, and the books were just right there.
Yeah.
Sometimes it could be an impulse buy. You're waiting in line for mom's going to pay for your cereal and hot dogs and coffee and whatever, and you're like, hey, mom, look at this awesome cover, please buy me this comic or whatever. You don't have that exposure these days. There's no kind of impulse buy. So I think everybody's got a cell phone in their pocket or a smart device. Kids are very tech savvy these days. They're constantly on their phones with their face down in a screen, good or bad, that can be debated, but
Yeah.
this is the way to capture those impulse buys. I don't know if it can happen at $5.99, but certainly Comixology and Marvel Unlimited, whatever the sales things for 99 cents, it's a buck.
Yeah.
I think it can reach people. So you're right. I mean, Scott is getting a lot of exposure. It's not surprising to me that Comixology is doing this, is using his name, because they know he brings in a different audience, right? Like Scott's got his own following. He certainly can bring in people who aren't usual readers of digital,
Yeah.
who say, yeah, this is going to come out from Dark Horse in print eventually, but I don't want to wait. I want to read this now. Let me go ahead and stick my toe into digital stuff. And it's a revenue stream, because I think what Comixology, and obviously they're going to promote it because they've paid Scott an amount of money, that allowed him to pay the creators. They've been working on these books for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And, especially during COVID, when everything was up in the air with print comics, and Scott has talked about this, where he wanted to make sure that his co-creators, as they were working on these books, were getting an income, right? Like if they've been working on this for 6 months, Scott's been paying the artists and co-creators for 6 months already. Hey, let me get you your page rate to make sure you can keep paying your bills, and things are good, and it helps foster the creative environment if everybody's happy. So obviously Comixology is giving them a big chunk of money to do this. So Comixology wants to recoup their investment, and rightly so. That's just business. So how can you do that? Well, you can get people to subscribe. They probably I would imagine Comixology probably makes more per unit when somebody just buys a single. I mean, they have to if it's
Yeah.
$4.99, as opposed to if you're subscribing to Comixology Unlimited, I think it's $8.99, and then obviously they're subsidized
Yeah.
by Amazon because Amazon bought Comixology a few years
I'm
ago.
just
So
thinking about convenience, Jace. For me, Comixology, the one advantage they have, they're an online comic book shop. I can't if I'm not going to walk into a comic shop, at least I can get the illusion of doing so online. And Substack, I'm already a little annoyed with Substack, and maybe I'm going to sound like a like a negative Nelly here, but getting 4 or 5. I mean, this week alone, I got 4 emails from different creators from Substack, and they're telling me about what they ate for breakfast and their lives, and I just want to read comics. And you know what I mean? And the thing is, it's really nice to just go to Comixology and Scott Snyder, oh, it's new. I just download I pay for the comic. It's $4.99. Sure, maybe Substack I pay $7 a month and I get all this stuff, but again, I don't know if I really want that. I'll just like I said, the impulse buy, I'm an impulse guy. I love comics. I'm gonna buy this. Comixology will send me a notice every month when We Have Demons comes out #2. I'm gonna get an automatic email reminder from Comixology anyway. But I don't need to know every nuance of a writer's life and what they're working on. And a lot of times they even spoil the stories when they send an email out, and I don't like that. You know what I mean? So I kind of
yeah,
like
no,
this, and maybe I'm old school, but I kind of like just being, reading it for the first time coming out like this. And I don't know, it'll be interesting to see how these things work out in terms of Substack versus Comixology, but I personally like this.
so I get what you're saying with Substack. I'm getting like 15 emails. Like I get so many emails. I was so far behind, and last
Yeah.
weekend I spent like catching up. And the thing is, like, the thing about Substack is it offers a look into the process, which some people like. If it's not your thing, then that's fine. But the other thing that it offers more interaction than this would necessarily. But
Mhm.
here's the thing: in order to have that interaction with Substack, you gotta respond to the Substack post pretty much the first day they're posted.
Oh.
Maybe within a day or two. If you fall behind like me, I'm responding to threads that they've already moved on. So with Substack, it, it sort of feels like an obligation. Like, am I getting the value for what I spent on these Substack subscriptions? Because the part of the reason and the attraction is that interaction, and I'm not getting the interaction, and it's on me because I'm falling behind because I signed up for too many and I got all these emails and whatever. So you're right. But let me ask you this, Rocky. So we know that Scott's got two more series coming out, and then three more coming later, and then what's called a prose illustrated novel. So I think it's a total of 8 titles that are coming from Comixology. So if you're paying $5.99 or $4.99 for this one, wouldn't you be better off getting the Comixology Unlimited for $8.99 a month once there's more than one title out?
You're probably right. Obviously, there's if it reaches that point that if it reaches that point where because I actually don't I actually buy most of my comics physical copies anyway. It's rare that I use Comixology. If it reaches that point, well, absolutely, I would agree with you. It would make more sense for me to go to Comixology Unlimited. Yeah, certainly, I would.
Yeah,
I would consider that if it comes to the point. But I also like owning. Actually owning
yeah,
I'm big
yeah.
on owning because I have a big, large database. I have a Dropbox account. I actually like owning the comic books, and maybe that's silly of me when if I could just, but I kind of like that myself. But
Yeah, no, I agree. The biggest thing for me these days is space when it comes to physical comics. I'm quickly running out of space, so I try not to get something unless I really, really like it or I would really want to support the creator. But the other thing is if you are subscribing to Comixology Unlimited, not only are you getting all the Snyder books, like I said, there's hundreds of books on there, thousands of books. In
yeah,
fact, there's thousands of books, all this other stuff that like you said, and like I intimated, being the kind of the modern day spinner rack, you can go on Comixology Unlimited if you can't get to your comic shop or you're on a trip or a train ride or a plane or whatever, and you can browse through. And even if you don't have Comixology Unlimited and you just go to Comixology.com or go to them through Amazon, a lot of times the books will have the first couple of pages are available free as a preview. So I
yeah,
think it's a great value and a way to, again, I think Comixology's promoting this. They brought in Scott Snyder, who previously hadn't done a lot of digital only stuff, to try to boost that subscriber base because
yeah.
like I said, they're owned by Amazon. At the end of the day, subscriptions are the way a lot of these big companies are. That's the way they show that they have value. And again, for me, it's great because I already pay for Amazon Prime, and even if I even if Comixology wasn't there, I order so much stuff through Amazon and use other Amazon Prime features that it's a no-brainer for me to have Amazon Prime. So this is just bonus
Oh, sweet.
for me. So anyway, enough about the business side of things. Let's sort of dive into the story itself. So I'll just give a real quick and dirty sort of recap of what this is about. Like, we have demons. Well, I guess actually Rocky turned to the creator page and it's reminded me I should give the credits first. So Scott Snyder's the writer, as we mentioned. Greg Capullo does the pencils. Jonathan Glapion, Capullo's a longtime collaborator on line work, does the inks. Dave McCaig on colors and Tom Napolitano on letters. And there's a little bit of maybe a disclaimer here talking about, because again, this is creator owned. This is mature. This isn't the stuff that you see in here wouldn't be approved over at DC. So Scott's basically like, look, you're going to see deep demons reaching up through people's buttholes, pulling out their guts, and there's going to be language, and there's going to be like he's like, this is your trigger warning because this is going to be brutal.
Yeah.
And when I think about something from Snyder and Capullo without restriction, right? We've talked about that creative freedom. These guys are both into some pretty hardcore type, stuff, like, the whole death metal thing with DC death metal, and they like that. I'm not a like metal. I would not consider myself a metal guy. Like Greg plays the guitar and he works out, and he's, if you've ever met him,
Yeah.
if you don't know him, you could maybe see how he's sort of intimidating with the dark sunglasses on, and he's very fit, he's very ripped, but he's a great guy. But I could see how people would be intimidated. He's got that sort of intimidating air, and that sort of permeates into what I was thinking about that we were going to have here. Okay, they're telling a story called We Have Demons. This is going to be metal. This is going to be brutal, and it's going to be horrific, and there's going to be a lot of blood, and it might have too much of an edge for me. Not that I wouldn't read it, not that I might not recognize that it might be a really great story, but I don't know. To be honest, I'm a little more of a soft boy. I'm a little more of a romantic at heart, as terrible as that it makes me sound. But I don't know. That's just where my
Yeah.
proclivities lie, and so I was unsure. But it was Scott Snyder, and again, it didn't cost me anything because I had the Amazon Prime. So I read this disclaimer, and I had also seen artwork that Greg had been posting that looked fantastic, and so I dove in, not really knowing what to expect. And I'll say this: um, while there are plenty of the brutal scenes with demons and blood and guts and some great action scenes, and Capullo gets to really exercise those artistic muscles, this is a much more emotionally grounded story than I necessarily expected. And the other thing that I didn't expect was I didn't expect this perfect merger of the idea of faith or religion slash magic and science. So often, especially in um, connected superhero universes like Marvel or DC, you see that magic and or religion is antithetical to science, right? Like look at like Superman's a perfect example, right? Like he is sort of the epitome of the futuristic science fiction of a character, right? Like the whole idea of him going from Krypton, red sun, to Earth, yellow sun, and how scientific explanation about his cells can store up the solar energy and blah blah blah. What's one of his biggest weaknesses? Magic, right? Because they're just diametrically opposed. Um, and what we get in this story is a perfect melding of science and faith or religion. So that maybe more than anything, the mythology that was established early on, I really loved, and it kind of stuck out to me as something that I really wanted to mention. So basically, what the story is there's this idea that demons have always been here on Earth, and again, getting back into the science, we all go all the way back to the Big Bang. And Scott was talking about during the Big Bang, the elements of matter that were created first were the lightest, and the ones that were created last were the heaviest. And the very first atomic element, which obviously these are fictional elements, it has an atomic weight of 0 because it's so light. and it's basically subatomic particles smaller than one proton. A proton makes a part of an atomic particle. Well, this whole substance, which is dubbed halo, is smaller than one proton. And it was created first. It was the first element, and it's sort of the symbol of light and life and everything that's good. And then the last element, which is super heavy and would be like atomic weight, I think he said, what was it, 666 or 999 or something like
Yeah.
super. I think he said 999, like super heavy. And it's called horn, and it's sort of the embodiment of evil, if you will. And so very early on, when the Earth was still forming and all the landmass was in one giant clump called Pangea, this small amount of halo landed on Earth, kind of broke apart upon hitting the atmosphere and rained down over Pangea, and it sort of permeated into the soil. And then much later, kind of a meteor shower of horn eventually came and also crashed into various places on Earth. And then as life started to evolve, the horn sort of waited. The evilness of the horn sort of waited around until there were beings of sufficient sophistication to sort of infect them and turn them into demons, basically. And so that actually would have wiped out humans, would have wiped out what were our ancestors. But as fate would have it, some pre-humans found a pocket of halo, and they were able to fashion weapons out of this element. They made 1,000 swords, which that's a super cool concept. And those 1,000 blades, I should say, they're not all swords. Some are axes and various other weapons. So they crafted those, and the people that wielded those over the history of humankind have known about the secret of horn and how it's corrupted what was this most sophisticated evolved life on Earth. And these 1,000 blades have protected us. And now we're to the point in modern times, there's only 9 of them left. And the main character of the story, Lamb, her father was one of those 9 that knew demons actually existed and was out there hunting and trying to keep mankind safe. And again, that's all the scientific stuff. The faith part and the religion part comes in, and the whole idea of the fight between light and dark, or good and evil. And Lamb's father, and there's always the thought when you talk about demons, they come from hell and Satan, and it's all tied in with Catholicism and religion and whatnot. But Lamb's father was also a preacher, so that there comes in the idea of faith. So what I find interesting, Lamb is the one that's telling us this story, and she's calling it an FOM story, and Scott Snyder has called it that as well. And FOM stands for Fall of Man. So we're really talking about the end times here, where apparently this conflict that's been going on since basically the beginning of time, it's ratcheting up. It's maybe reaching its end game. There's only 9 of the 1,000 blades left, and the demons are becoming more and more bold and looking to kind of corrupt and take over, and maybe finally have the end game where they do wipe out humans and what they call God folk, which is basically religious people that believe in the good of their fellow man. So great mythology, but again, what I go back to is this idea of not only did they create a really interesting mythology and an antagonist that's great and lets Greg stretch his artistic muscles, but again, they've melded that idea of science. Like, he's going back and he's talking about the atomic weight of elements. He's talking about the Big Bang. He's talking about evolution on Earth. But yet so much of the story is grounded in faith and religion and the idea of demons, which you certainly think of as sort of magical or supernatural. And more than anything, that's what I keep coming back to, the story of why I enjoyed it so much. So I thought it was great. It was emotional. I thought some of Greg's best work, which I don't think he gets enough credit. And I've talked about this before. I think specifically mentioned it when I was talking. I named him as one of my favorite Batman artists. And it's not just that I love him on Batman. I love him so much on Bruce Wayne, because I think Greg Capullo draws some of the best facial expressions when it comes to emotion. And as cool and visceral as it is to see him draw these demons and blood and scary creatures and whatnot, you can flip through the pages of this digital comic and look at Lamb's face on various pages, and see the emotion and see the relationship with her father, and see love there at times and fear there at times. And I just, he doesn't get enough credit for that. So that's sort of a recap of what the story's about, and what I love most about it, I think, is just that idea of melding the science and the religion or the magic. So, what were your thoughts, Rocky? What stood out to you when you read it?
Oh, the symbolism was really good. I really like thematically the relationship, how all the characters have some sort of connection to some larger mythology. Even the main character Lam, is actually is it's shortened for Lamusu or Lamasu, which means ancient angel. So Pastor Cash, his daughter, he names her Lamasu, meaning ancient angel. Obviously, there's some connection to some mythology there. Lamb grows up. Lamb grows up. What I really love about this, Lamb grows up almost having some doubts of her father, because she knows something's different about her father, who's also a pastor, and her father ends up marrying this woman named June, and young Lamb always suspects that her father has some secrets because he disappears for long periods of time, and he's mysterious, and she does some investigating, and she even confronts her dad at one point, and ultimately she at one point she says something very interesting. She says to her dad, Dad, you can tell me what it is that's bothering you. We all have our demons. It's okay to have demons. We all have them. And her father panics and says, no, don't ever say that. and because it was just an expression when she said it, but it really becomes manifest as to what her father meant when after her father passes, and she speaks to her stepmother, and the stepmother reveals more of the mythology and the secrets to her. You can see why all this is so serious. But what's interesting is that Lamb goes through her life sort of not having the type of faith that her father does, not being that religious, and that connection between faith is what powers the halo and the horn. The halo being the positive elements of humanity, I guess the positive reinforcement, sort of like the good, and the horn being the evil. There's something about faith. Faith does something to the blood that creates pockets of vitality, and it the faith the halo is powered by faith, and when you couple the faith and the halo, you can make weapons, and that's how they made the swords and all these weapons, of which there's only 9 blades left, and it's just fascinating. And so I love how this story progresses with young Lamb. Ultimately, it's when she confronts demons for the first time at the end of the first issue. It works so well because at first, her blade is supposed to glow when it's near a demon, but it doesn't glow. And it doesn't glow because she lacks faith. And at first it's like, well, that's really weird. But then it makes so much sense. It's when she realizes that this is true. Oh my God, there really are demons. Suddenly she realizes her dad was telling the truth. She gets faith, and that empowers her more. So it's like you said, it's that drawing that connection between faith and science. And, and we even have that in our real world science. There's all kinds of science in the real world here where there's possible connections between positive thinking and neurons in the brain and healing. I mean, we're still at, that's a study of our science that's still in its infancy. And I like the fact that Snyder's taken those ideas and he's introducing a horror element to it. And I really, really like it. And the fact that we have these huge, Earth is constantly being bombarded by horns, by these meteorites, these little meteorites, which contain the horn element, the sort of like the evil contaminating element. But Earth has only ever gotten one massive halo impact. And so there's more horn than halo on Earth. And that might be why, maybe that's why Earth right now is so dark and it's getting darker. We need more halo. Why is there so few halos, but so much horn? And, does that account for what is the nature of good and evil? Is it science? Is it faith-based? Well, Snyder's answer seems to be that it's a little bit of both. But the only way to really defeat the evil is to have faith. And that's the most essential part. And So that mythology coming into this story is what has got me intrigued. And I got to say, Snyder is always really good at starting off a story like this. He's really good. It's being able to continue that momentum that I find sometimes he's a little hit and miss with at least some of his DC work. But again, I mean, I'm in for the long haul here. I'm more than happy to give him a lot of leg room here because I love this concept, and he's right in his element here. And yeah,
Yeah, the other part about this, when we talk about creative freedom, it's not just the freedom to use curse words or have the art be a little more visceral or bloody, but it's also the freedom to have it last as long as they want it to last.
yeah,
Have each of these digital issues be as many pages as they need it to be to tell that month's story, you know. So that's, I mean, I'm sure there are some restrictions. It can't, you know, create 1,000 pages a month. First of all, Greg's hands would fall off. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot more freedom to have the space, because I feel like I agree with you. Like, Scott doesn't always have the best execution on his DC work, but I have always felt like from the very first Metal series through his Justice League run to Death Metal, the the biggest part of why it's sometimes a little choppy or the pacing isn't great for me is because I can see where Scott's got these huge ideas to tell this epic story in scope, but he just doesn't have the real estate. He just doesn't have the pages or the space to be able to flesh out all these incredible ideas that he has.
yeah,
And I think that's the biggest thing that impacts the quality of his work. I don't think it's actually that his ideas aren't good at all. I think it goes the other way. His ideas are so good and so big that they need room to live and breathe. And certainly when you're talking about a big connected universe that's been around for 80 years, like DC, it doesn't, those two things don't always mesh.
yeah. And there's
That's what has to,
editorial interference too.
yeah, exactly. And not that Scott doesn't have editor, you know, working with him on this, um, you know, on Noctera and on his Undiscovered Country. He's been working with Will Dennis. Will Dennis is the editor on this as well, and he's worked with Will for a long time, and they have a good working relationship. So Will is getting to fulfill that true best role of an editor, which is to make the book better, not to make it shorter, not to be, hey, it's got to fit in X amount of pages, but to make the story better. So, not to say that every idea that Scott comes up with, every script that he writes, every word needs to be in the book, because maybe there are some things that are extraneous or that would flow better if you cut some things out. But at least he'll have the freedom to put in more of the story and allow it room to breathe. So, and I agree with you, Rocky. The whole idea of this relating to our world in terms of, you know, is it science? Is it faith? I think of that little girl meme, where the little dark haired girl, she shrugs her shoulders. Why not both? Why can't it be both, right? Why
Yeah,
can't we have both? And that's what I feel like Scott is doing here. Um, and it's fantastic. And don't get me wrong, this is, and we cannot sell Greg Capullo short either, because yes, there's absolutely fantastic art and line work and emotion in the faces, like I mentioned before. But Greg's also a story. He's a storyteller in and of himself, and I guarantee Scott would be the first one to say that Greg's got a lot of input into the story, obviously into character design, into where the story's going, and you know, ideas and all that sort of stuff. And so that has me excited too, especially when it comes to Lamb's father's partner, Gus, who is mentioned throughout the story several times. And then when he finally shows up, he's sort of larger than life on the page. And if you look at him closely, he almost looks, he obviously is something more than human, but he looks more human than the other demons that Lamb was confronted with. But if you look at the top, and Rocky's got it up, if you're watching this on YouTube, he's got the full page splash there. And this, first of all, this guy's huge. He dwarfs Lamb. But he has almost like a normal, mostly normal human face. But then on top of it, it's almost like he's got a demon head. Like, is he half human, half demon? Is he, you know, we don't know what he is just yet, other than super interesting and super intriguing looking. Um,
yeah.
but
It's
maybe the best thing about it is, you know, it's the most innocuous name. It's just Gus, right? Uh, and then when you finally see him, because I was thinking, like, what is he? Is he a dog? is he some kind of little sidekick
Yeah.
kind of guy? And then when you finally see him, no, he's this giant paramilitary looking half human, half demon. I don't know. I'm really
Yeah.
excited to
Well,
learn.
Snyder
Uh,
referenced in the early story about Atlanteans and then the ancient Nephilim and the Homo maledictus race. So Snyder has taken some from our own real world mythology about past races of giant men, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm like you. I'm wondering who this Gus is. I mean, I'm sure Gus is short for something, just like his daughter Lamb was short for something. So he's like I said, it is interesting. He does look like a crossbreed between a probably a Nephilim or a giant and some sort of demon. So it's intriguing. So definitely, it's one of those things where it's the thing. The art here is just absolutely fantastic. I mean, Greg Capullo here. I mean, this is just a fantastic image because he looks like a paramilitary something. I gotta tell you, but it's quite the thing, and that's a heck of a sword he's wielding there too.
yeah, and I kind of wondered at first, maybe that's just like like you would wear a coonskin cap. Maybe that's just he made a cap out of a demon that he killed, but the eyes glow, so it was making me thinking it's actually part of him. And you mentioned the sword. Flip to the next page, Rocky. Uh, I love when he puts that first panel there. When he puts the sword point down on the ground, that sword is nearly as tall as Lamb is. Like it's really close.
Yeah,
So I look forward to future issues of Greg's art where Gus is just wielding that sword and just slashing through demons, and demon entrails and blood are flying everywhere. I anticipate that we'll get some of that in the near future. So yeah, I again, this was my book of the week. It was better than anything I read. Nice House on the Lake was close, and that also, I talked about this on our new comic Wednesday episode. That also is a story that's not beholden to any previous continuity. Yes, it's a DC comic, but it's obviously not set in the regular DC universe. It's a regular story, but by design, it's a very small and intimate story about a very small group of people that are trapped in a very small area, which kind of adds to the claustrophobia and the fear and the fact that it's a horror story that James Tynion is telling. The the potential that is here, that we get introduced, that you feel in the story and the mythology that Scott and Greg are giving us, that's what for me gives it an edge. And again, not to slight anything that Tynion's doing, Nice House on the Lake is fantastic. Um, and it's not supposed to have that big open feel, but I don't know. This just felt like We Have Demons just felt like something new and something different. And when you talk about a fall of a man story, immediately your head goes to some sort of post-apocalyptic wasteland type story after a nuclear war or whatever. Where how many of those stories have we seen and read over the years? Like hundreds at this
yeah,
point, right? In movies and cartoons and comics and novels, just in video games everywhere. Um, so to be able to take that concept, the fall of man story, flip it on its head, and give us this with this incredible merging of science and faith, it blew me away. I was just super impressed, and I just love everything about this. I love the distribution model. I love the art. I love the color work, the lettering, the pacing, the mythology, even the first few pages where, and I typically don't like this, where all the words are on the left side and it's really kind of expositional info dumps, and we're getting the art along the right side. Immortal Hulk did it recently with an issue, and whenever I get it in an ongoing series, it just feels like Spawn will do it every once in a while, and it feels like, oh, they've fallen behind where they need to be in the story, so you get an issue like this, so they can give a lot of information in a short amount of pages to get us caught up. That wasn't this. This was just the best way to present this information, and reading those paragraphs and seeing what Scott and Greg chose to illustrate as the visuals for whatever information was in those few sentences was fantastic. And there were a few moments where I was blown away that the page that's up right now with those 1,000 swords. I was just like, when we got to that moment, I was like, oh hell yeah, we're gonna learn about 1,000 blades. So that was a moment. There was another one later on where Lamb's stepmother is talking about her dad, telling her, and when her stepmom, what does she call him? He was the Liam Neeson of the group.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, that was fantastic. Um, because it's a great illustration. Her dad looks really badass. But I love the costumes with these blue hooded costumes that the 9 blades that are left, their bears are wearing with hoods. And yeah, so that was fantastic. So there were just a lot of little moments like that. Like, as great as it is overall, there were then even better moments for me, like real peaks, where I was like, man, when I saw their costumes with the halo on the front and thinking about 1,000 blades, all I could think was, man, I hope they make a T-shirt. I hope they make a T-shirt with the halo symbol on the front, and on the
Yeah.
back it just says like 1,000 blades or something like that. Like I would definitely rock one of those at a comic convention for sure. So yeah, I just thought it was fantastic.
Yeah. And I
Any
think
yeah, go ahead, Rocky. Final thoughts.
I was just, yeah, I was just going to say, I also, I think it's worth bringing up that, the lead character Lamb here, she was bitten by a copperhead snake at the beginning, and that symbolism of the snake in the Garden of Eden. The Garden
Mm-hmm.
of Eden is one of those sacred oases that would have been, which would have represented where a piece of halo would have landed in the Garden of Eden, and within the Garden of Eden is the poisonous snake. And it's very symbolic that Lamb, the lead character, ends up getting bitten by a copperhead snake, ends up her own father, Pastor Cash, cuts off her arm, and throughout the story is building her a new arm. So, I mean, it's kind of an inside joke there. At least I could joke that she's, even when her father's not around, he's lending her a hand. He's always trying to improve her hand. And then, of course, the issue ends with her having a newly improved sort of hand with a new sword attached to this hand, which she lost to evil, lost to this horn, this represented by the snake. So again, all the characters in some way, in some capacity, represent the theme, that dichotomy between the halo and the horn that Snyder has crafted so well. And again, hats off to Greg Capullo for just fantastic art, giving that life.
Yeah, I agree. Last thing I'll mention: have you ever seen the Matthew McConaughey movie? Bill Paxton is in as well, called Frailty.
I don't think I have. No.
So I was reminded a little bit of that. So in the movie, Matthew McConaughey's father is Bill Paxton, and he believes that God sent him this message, and he's the only one who can see demons that are out there in the world. So obviously, it reminded me of this. And then Matthew McConaughey is basically recounting the story to an FBI agent and talking about his brother and how their dad. You're never quite sure what's real and what's not. Is what Matthew McConaughey is saying true? Are there actual demons, or was his dad just crazy? And so it reminded me of this. And if you haven't seen it, I definitely recommend it. If you watch it, you'll know why it reminds me of this. And I'm curious. Next time I talk to Scott, I'm gonna be curious to know if that had any influence at all. I mean, it's completely different than this, but there are just a couple of seeds there that make me wonder. And it's a fantastic movie if you haven't seen it. So
Oh, I'll have to
uh,
check it out. Sounds good.
yeah, yeah, it's called Frailty. It's definitely worth a watch, especially we're in the month of Halloween. So,
Right on.
everybody, if you're listening to us on the podcast, be sure you go and check out the show notes. I'll have some links in there of where you can go to find the book. Like I said, there's 3 different ways to get it. If you have Amazon Prime, if you have Comixology Unlimited, or you can do like Rocky did and just go to Comixology or Amazon and buy it. If you're watching us on the YouTube channel, check the comment section. I'll have it there for you to check out as well. So looking forward to the next release of Scottober. As I mentioned earlier, Scott Snyder's the writer. Francis Manapul is the artist, and it's called Clear. And it's basically a futuristic world where you can sort of skin the world to look like what you want it to look like. You can put a filter on it. So if you want to walk through the world thinking that you're living in Lord of the Rings land, you can do that. If you want everything to look like you're living in the Old West, you can skin the world to look like that. If you want it to look futuristic like Blade Runner, you can skin the world like that. And it's a murder mystery set in that world. And the reason it's called Clear is because the main character, sort of the police detective of the story, chooses not to put any skin on his world. So he sees the world. He's one of the few probably who doesn't. And so he sees the world as it actually is, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So I'm a big fan of Francis Manapul's art. obviously I'm a fan of Scott Snyder, so I'm looking forward to that. So be sure you check out We Have Demons on Comixology in whichever way you hope to check it out. And we'll probably be back next week to talk about Clear. So thanks for joining us, everybody. Rocky, you want to let everybody know where they can find you online?
Yeah, you can check me out. I have a YouTube channel called Comic Boom. That's Comic Boom with an exclamation mark. And I usually just, Jason, I usually do, you and I obviously do DC comic reviews on a weekly basis. And occasionally I try to add some additional videos. But yeah, you can check me out there.
All right, great. So that's going to do it for this episode, everybody. Really, really highly recommend We Have Demons. Go and check it out. And check out Rocky's YouTube channel as well. Like he said, DC Spotlights. He's got a lot of other past content, great reviews on there. So go and check that out. All right, everybody, that's going to do it for this episode. We really appreciate you joining us as always, and we will talk to you next time.